In today's show, we're going to be jumping into Lightroom Classic, where we are going to be taking a look at the crop tool as well as the AI masking tools. Hey everyone, welcome into Magnolia Photography SC. I'm Jeff House, and I'm a wildlife photographer in Charleston, South Carolina. If you missed the last video that I put up, we took a look at the very first step that I take when editing my wildlife photos. And that is the use of a program called Topaz Photo AI. And this program offers a lot of features and benefits, which we discuss in that video. So if you didn't get a chance to see it, be sure to check it out. But I focused on two features inside of that program that I use on every wildlife photo that I edit. And it's really the main reason that I use this program. And that is to reduce the noise that's commonly found in wildlife photos. And it's also to sharpen the images. And these two features inside of this program are so easy to apply. It's so quick. And I just feel that when we compare Topaz Photo AI to other editing software, I don't know if it's their algorithm, how they go about it, but whatever they're doing, their noise reduction and sharpening process is just beyond what everyone else is doing, in my opinion. So I did, again, include a link in that video. I'll include one in this video. Go to this link. You can download a free trial version of the program. You get the full program. And run your photos through it. See what you think when you reduce the noise and add some sharpening to it. I think you're going to be very happy with the results that you get from this program. One question that I get from so many newer photo editors is, hey, you know, I've been working with Lightroom Classic, or I've been working with some other editing software, and I'm starting to get a feel for how to use these tools, but I'm still confused at the editing process. I don't really understand what my goal is. I don't understand what I'm trying to accomplish, and I don't know where to begin. If this is you, you're not alone. A lot of photo editors feel this way when they're first beginning, right? You get in there and you're like, okay, do I need to change the lighting? Do I need to adjust my white balance? What do I need to do to get this photo to the end point? And I think it's important in photography to keep a couple of things in mind. And this really begins with image capture, right? When we're out there with our cameras and we're taking pictures, one of the goals that we should be focusing on when taking pictures is really putting a high priority on the subject of our photo, right? Because that's what it's really all about. So if we're looking at this picture, that we have of this bird up on the screen right now, that is clearly the subject of our photo. But what is it about the surroundings and the environment that they are in? Can we include something that's going to support this subject and better tell the story of our image? Or are there elements in this photo that we need to exclude because it only serves to make the photo more confusing, and it only serves to detract from our subject? Those are the things that we need to be running through our minds as we're taking photos. Now, when we get into the post-production phase and we start editing our photos, we're going to have some of those same thoughts, especially when we go to use the crop tool. The crop tool is going to be a way for us to fine-tune our composition. And it could be a way that, a tool that we use to help exclude some items in the photo that are distracting. Maybe we thought they would be great when we were taking the image, out in the field, but when we get into the editing process, we realize I probably shouldn't have included that. Can I do something with the cropping to eliminate it? These are all things that we're going to be going through when we're looking at that. Now, I urge you, when it comes to the cropping part of your editing process, to not rush that process. It's very easy, and a lot of professional photographers take it for granted. They pull up the crop tool, they do a quick crop, and they move on. The way we crop an image is going to play into the way we compose our image, and this can literally make or break our photos. So take a couple extra seconds, spend a little time, and make sure that you put a good crop on your photo. Let's jump in and take a look at the cropping tool that we have here in Lightroom Classic. One thing that I want to point out is we're not going to spend a ton of time on the cropping tool because if you use any editing software, they are all pretty much the same. There's nothing overly complex about them, but there's a couple things to note. If we come in here, we can see that we have the aspect, the original is up here, and we have these little arrows next to it. We're going to click on that. And when we do, we're going to get a list of aspect ratios that we can use for our cropping. Now, typically, two of the most common are 4:5 and 5:7. It doesn't matter which one you use. This is all a preference. I'm going to use 5:7 because that's what I like to use. And then we're going to take a look at what we have here. Okay, and we have this rule of thirds grid, essentially. And what this tells us, in theory, is that our subject should be at one of these four intersecting lines. Okay, and if we do that, that's going to give us a good rule of thirds. It's going to place our subject off center in the photo, and it's going to make it more interesting. But there's some little things that we need to kind of keep in mind, especially when we're dealing with animals, whether they're looking or whether they're moving. There's some good practices that we want to use when cropping. So let's take a look at this for a second. If I were to bring my crop box in, right, where I want to try to get my subject here on that line, if I were to crop the photo using this method, wouldn't be a very good crop, right? We are cutting off the back of the bird, and not only that, but we're smushing the bird all the way over on the left side of the frame, and it looks awkward. It looks uncomfortable. And from a visual standpoint, this is not very appealing. So this is not a crop that I would go with. What if we went to the other side of the spectrum here and went over to the right-hand side? Well, there is a kind of a rule, if you will, in the world of photo editing and cropping, and that is if we have something where it's looking in a certain direction or it's moving in a certain direction, we don't want to put that subject on the side of the frame that it's looking into or moving towards. And the reason for that is, again, it looks very smushed up against the side. There's no breathing room for the bird in this case, and therefore it creates kind of visual anxiety. The viewer may not realize it, but there's going to be something about the photo that doesn't appeal to them. And it's usually the lack of space that we have between where the bird is looking and the end of the frame, or where the bird is flying in the edge of the frame. So we never want to keep them pushed up against that side that they're going towards. We always want to keep them a little further back from that. So in this particular case, I am going to place this crop somewhere right around here on that front leg. So that'll kind of go up this line right here, and then we come across and we got the eye on that. Now, of course, we could go lower with this, but I don't really like that because I feel like the legs are just a little too close to the bottom of the frame, and it takes out some of the reflection that we have in the water. I also am not a big fan of this little bright shoreline up here. And that kind of brings me back to what we were talking about more towards the beginning of this show, right? We have to figure out what we want to include and exclude in our images. Now, of course, you can't tell this based on how I captured the image, but up here on this little muddy, bright shoreline, there were a bunch of branches and sticks going all sorts of different directions. Now, if I had lowered my shooting angle when I captured this picture, those branches and those sticks, all of that would have been directly behind the bird. And that would have been a visual mess because the bird would have blended in to all those sticks and branches going all these different directions behind him. And that would have really made the photo look distracting, and it would have detracted from our subject. So instead, I raised my camera angle up to a higher level and eliminated all of those branches. Now, I still don't like the shoreline back there because there's a brightness to it. And we have to keep something in mind when it comes to brightness in our images. The viewer's eye is going to want to gravitate to the brightest part of the image. So I don't want the bright shoreline competing with the bird, because I find when I look at the image as it is right now, I go to the bird and then I gravitate up to that shoreline. That's not what I want to have happen, right? I want the viewer to be focused on that bird and solely on that bird with this particular image. So what we're going to do is we're going to place this crop right back here, like I said, where the eye is on that line and the leg is kind of running up the vertical here. And you can see that that's going to eliminate most of the shoreline for the most part. We'll have a little brightness here in the water and a little brightness here. This is the reflection of the bird, of course, but we have some brightness coming from up here. We will reduce some of those effects through our editing, but this is the crop that I like right here. And again, the reason I like this is that we give the bird a little space on the left-hand side, right? We're not cutting it off. We're not squishing it right up there. So that's a comfortable feel to the image, having that little space. And then, of course, as we were talking about, the bird is looking to the right. So we left a good amount of space from the bird to the right edge of the frame to give more comfort and visual interest to the picture. So that is cropping. Right now, this is why I was saying, don't rush through this. This is a more simple example when it comes to cropping, but these are the thought processes that you want to have as you're going through this, right? Am I cutting off the bird? Am I squishing them too close to one side? Am I creating visual interest? Am I including things that should be excluded? Am I excluding things that maybe I should include? So these are all the thoughts that are going to be going through your head. But that is how I'm going to crop this image. The next thing that I want to talk about is the AI masking tools inside of Lightroom Classic. And the first thing that we need to really kind of define here is, what is a masking tool? So a masking tool is really just a way of highlighting a specific part of our image to either exclude from editing or include into editing. And what will happen when we select or mask something in Lightroom Classic is that part of the photo will have a red overlay. And that is just a signal to show us this is what's going to be edited when you apply your edits. Now, when we are editing in any kind of photo editing software, we have two adjustments we can make. If we are using the masking tool and we are only editing a specific part of the image, that is referred to as a local adjustment, because we're only editing a part of the photo. But if we're outside of masking and we're applying an edit to the entire image, that is called a global adjustment. So we're not in masking right now. So if I were to go over and just change the exposure here, you can see that we are impacting the entire image by changing the exposure. Again, a global adjustment. We're not going to do that though. We want to use the masking tool to create depth, texture, and dimension, right? These are what create visual interest in the image. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here inside of Lightroom. We're going to come up to this tool here, this circle with the dotted line around it. You can see it says masking. So if we click on that, we're going to see the various masks that we have. We have a subject, a sky, a background, and then we have a list of object, brush, linear, radiant, and range. Now, the ones that we are going to focus on today are subject, background, object, brush, and radial gradients, because these are the ones that I use in 99% of my images. Now, what we have in this photo is a bird standing in some water. So if we were to look at this from how Lightroom is going to see it, the bird is going to be our subject, and the water all around the bird is going to be our background. Generally speaking, what I'm looking to do here is I am looking to darken down my background a little bit, because that's going to help to naturally make my subject a little bit brighter, right? And we know, because we just talked about this a little while ago, the viewer's eye is going to gravitate to the brightest part of the image. So I want to darken down the background while also maintaining detail in the background, right? So we have to be careful about what details we're including in the photo, and we don't want to make it so dark that we lose that. That's an important part in telling our story. But in this case, we're only dealing with water. And this photo was shot in early morning in this lagoon. And so I kind of like the vibe of the water being a little bit darker in this image. And it might have a background that's just a little bit darker than I would typically go, but I think it fits this image well. So let's take a look at how we would do that. So we're going to come over here and I'm simply going to click on the background mask, and you'll see that Lightroom highlights what it determined to be the background in red. And you can see that it did a really good job. And Lightroom, in most cases, will do a really good job in selecting the appropriate mask. But if we look closely, we can see that on the bird's leg, we have some red here. That's okay, because Lightroom gives us options to adjust our mask manually. So if we come over to the mask that we just added, we have options here to either add to it or subtract from it. And of course, since the red is on the bird, we want to subtract. So we're going to select subtract. Then we have additional options, which are the same mask that we were just looking at for reducing the mask. Now, the easiest way to go about this is to just use the brush mask. So we're going to choose that. And then what we can do is we can either come over here and change our brush size by dragging this slider. And then we can change the feathering, the flow, and the density by changing these. Now, of course, the more we reduce those, the more we're going to limit the effect the mask has on in the image, right? So if I were to reduce these to 50% and I was to brush over this red part of the leg, we're only going to reduce that mask by 50%, right? It's not going to completely remove the red. If we drag them all the way down to 0, it's not going to do anything. I want to keep it at 100 because most of the time when I'm using the mask tools, I'm looking to either add it or take it away completely. And so I keep it at 100. The other way that I can adjust the brush size, and this is a great thing to do with Lightroom, they have keyboard shortcuts. Learning the keyboard shortcuts in Lightroom is a great way to go. It just speeds up the editing process, makes everything much more efficient. But we have the left and right parenthesis key on the keyboard. And if we use the left parenthesis, we can make it smaller. If we use the right, we can make it larger. I'm going to use the left key, and I'm just going to make this small enough, right, to kind of go over the leg. And then I'm just going to paint right over that leg, and I'm going to reduce that part where the red mask was on. And there we go. That was a really simple fix, right? Because again, Lightroom did a really good job of selecting the mask. Now we can come down here to our editing panel and make the adjustments that we want to make. Now, the first thing I'm going to adjust here is the exposure on the water. So once we start making our edits, the overlay will disappear so we can see it. But I'm going to drag this down and make it a little bit darker. And I'm going to go down to about minus 25. That's minus 23. Now, it's close enough, but the minus 25 area is pretty good for my taste here. I like the way that looks. We can still see some detail in the water, but it gives it that little darker vibe that I'm going for. Now, contrast is something that I like to add to every element while editing. So we're working on the background mask here. I'm going to increase this to plus 20, and plus 20 is really where I like to keep my contrast with everything that I'm editing. It's just a value that I like and that I feel comfortable with. And so that's what I do. Again, you can play with this. There's no science to it. This is completely an art. Remember, we're editing to taste. So don't be afraid to go higher with these sliders, go lower with these sliders, see what effect the slider has on it, and then set it to a point that you feel comfortable with, that fits the vision that you have for your image. So I'm going to stick with the 20. Then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to go to the highlights. Now the highlights, of course, is going to either reduce or increase some of the brightness that's occurring in the background. And we're seeing this part be affected, right? This little shine coming from off the shore area. And then we have the reflection of the bird. So if we reduce that, it's going to reduce some of those highlights a little bit. If we increase it, obviously it's going to bring them out a little bit. I want to reduce it just a little bit. So I'm going to go down to about minus 15. That is something that I like. Now with the shadows, we can, again, decrease them or increase them. And if we decrease them, we're going to make everything a little bit darker. So with this slider, I'm going to go down to about minus 15 with this one as well. Because again, I think it just further supports the ultimate goal that I have with this image. Now, because I reduced the highlights and shadows To prevent the background from getting too dark, I'm going to use the white slider to add just a little bit of light to the background, okay? You can see it's very subtle, right? But it's adding just a little bit of light. Because the other thing that I need to keep in mind is that we're going to be adding a vignette to this, right? And a vignette darkens the area around our subject, and it draws our viewer's eye because it makes our subject naturally a little bit brighter. So when we add that vignette, we're going to darken down the background just by using that feature. I don't want the background to get too dark because that vignette will serve to help us with that. So I'm going to increase the whites here to about plus 25, just again, to give a little bit of lightness into the background. I'm not going to touch the black slider on my background, and I rarely ever do. Because again, when we apply that vignette, I don't want to add double darkness to our background because then we run the risk of losing too much detail in the background. So that is all I'm going to do with the background mask. All we did was a local adjustment to the background to get the tones and the detail that we want from it. The next thing we need to focus on, of course, is our subject. It is the bird. And so we're going to add a mask here. This very simply just going to go over here, click on the plus sign to add the mask. And now we can do one of two things. And I used to use the select subject tool a lot, but over the past couple of months, I've actually been switching my process for selecting my subject, and I'll show you why. Let's select the subject first. Again, Lightroom's going to select it, does a very good job. But if we look closely, we're going to see that we have a little cleaning up to do. It's selected some of the water between the beak. It's selected some of the water between the legs. And this is very common when using the subject mask in Lightroom. When you're photographing birds, it will constantly choose the area between the bird's legs. It does the opposite of what you're looking for. If you're looking to include the mask, it will exclude it. If you're looking to exclude it, it will include it. And so it requires you to do a little bit of adding and subtracting from your mask. So just like the first time we subtracted the leg out, if we want to take the red out between the beak and the legs, we come over, we hit subtract. We once again choose our brush tool, our parenthesis key to get the size of the brush that we want for the detail that we're working on, and we simply paint it out. And of course, my hand was a little loose there, and I hit the lip. No big deal, though. I'll show you what we can do with that. And then we'll take it out from between the bird's legs. Okay, and simple as that. We could just simply add a mask if you wanted to. There's other ways to do this too with shortcuts on the keys, but I just want to show you the add mask too. So we can do that. And now we have a pretty good mask. I'm going to do a little bit more subtraction here because we do have a little bit more down here by the food that the bird is feasting on. So we do that and we have a pretty good mask, right? Now, that's not too bad, right? Not too taxing, not too complicated, but I think we can do it using a simpler method. So I'm going to delete this mask and I'm going to show you the method that I've been going to. And I'm going to undo that because I accidentally deleted all masks and I just want to delete this mask. So we'll delete mask 2. So we're keeping our background mask and now we're going to add an object mask, okay? And by adding an object mask, what it's going to allow us to do doesn't have to be neat, doesn't have to be perfect by any means. We're just going to paint over the perimeter of our subject here. And then we're going to let Lightroom determine the mask. And does a pretty good job, doesn't it? Now we don't have to remove anything there from the beak or from between the legs because it did a little better selection for us this time. So that's just going to save us a little extra time. Not a big deal. You can do it how you choose to do it, whatever you feel comfortable doing. But if you want to save a little bit of time, this is a great way of going. All right, so we're back over to the editing panel, just like we did with the background mask. And now we're going to make the edits to our bird to try to figure out what can we do from an editing standpoint now to draw some attention to our subject while keeping it looking natural. So I'm going to add a little exposure to our bird. It's a little dark. I want to just bring up the light on that bird. Now, don't worry. I'm going to go a little brighter than what we really want to do because we're going to bring some of that back down. So I'm going to go up to 1.25. Now, that's pretty bright. and just a little unnatural looking. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to add my contrast. And if you remember, plus 20 is where I like to be for my contrast. And now what I'm going to do with the highlights, again, just like we did with the background mask, is bring it down. And you can see how it's taking some of that brightness that we used on the exposure increase. And now we're just going to bring this down to a part that we like. And I'm just looking at the bird while I move it back and forth to figure out what I like as far as a brightness. And I like that right there. And that's minus 10. I'm going to do the same thing with the shadows. Because we're dealing with a bird that has feathers, right? We have a lot of the depth and the texture and dimension. Well, let's add some shadows to that because that will help to create even more depth, texture, and dimension. So we're going to bring that down. This is where we can use shadow as our friends here. And I'm going to go down to about minus 20 with the shadows. And I really like how that looks. Now, if you remember when we were doing the background mask, I reduced the highlights and the shadows, but I added a little bit of white into the photo to prevent them from getting too dark, right? I'm going to do the same thing with our subject. I want to add just a little bit of light back into the feathers, and it's just going to be subtle. Just this little subtle increase of light. And that's how the whites work. And we go up to plus 10 with the whites. And I think that that gives us a nice looking light here on our bird. And now I will use the blacks, and I will use the blacks again to support depth, texture, and dimension. Tired of hearing that yet? I know it can, we're talking about that a lot, but these are important things because this is what's going to give our photos some visual interest to the viewer. So I like to hang right around minus 10 when it comes to the blacks. My range is typically minus 5 to minus 15. But like I said, in most cases, I'm falling right around the minus 10. I like it. I like what we've done so far. So we've done a background mask and we've done a mask on our subject, the bird. Now keep in mind that if for some reason we did the bird and we wanted to make an adjustment to the background, all we need to do is go over here and click on mask number 1. And now we're back to the background mask and we can tweak our edits if we want to. And of course, if we did some edits there and wanted to tweak the bird, we can go back to mask number 2 and do the same thing. Now I'm going to do really one last final step, right? These are the 3 masks that I pretty much use on 99.9% of my photos. We're now going to add that vignette. And we can use, I'm going to click off the masking features right now. We can go into Lightroom and go down to effects, and we can add a vignette here. But for me personally, I don't really like this tool inside of Lightroom. And I feel like for adding a simple vignette, we need to work a little harder using the effects panel. And I don't want to do that. We want to work a little smarter. So we're going to go back into the masking, and what we're going to do is we are now going to introduce our radial gradient. Now, when I click on this, all I'm going to do is go over to my picture, and I'm going to click and hold the left mouse button while I drag out. And I can create any shape that I really want here. And I'm just going to create something kind of oblong, kind of like an egg. And I'm going to drag that over. But wait, you're thinking, Jeff, you said earlier in the video, anything that has red on it is going to be edited. So now our bird is inside of our radial gradient. Isn't that going to be edited? Well, if we left it like this, it is, but we're going to do a very simple and quick step. We're going to come over here to the panel, the editing panel, and you'll see that there's a little thing that says invert with a box. Check the box. And now you can see that it removes the red from our bird. Here's another little trick. This is how I like to do my radial gradients, and this is why I make them so big. It spreads out the light and softens it as it moves towards my subject. But if you're a little fearful of using it this way, you can come over here and you see this little red square. Just click it and hold it and drag it out. And you can see what I'm doing here is I'm removing the red even more from the subject. Kind of creates a little bit of a safety zone. I don't really care to use that, so I just keep it small. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come over here to create my vignette, and I'm simply just going to reduce my exposure in order to create that. Now, here's a thing with vignettes. Don't go crazy with this, all right? Don't bring this down a bunch and make the edges and everything real dark, because it's going to become obvious that you're using a vignette and it doesn't look very good. Okay, it looks a little unnatural, looks a little awkward. What we're trying to do here is subtly darken around our subject so that the viewer's eye gravitates to the subject. All right, so we want to do that very subtly and do it without them ever knowing that there was something that we did to create that element that draws them in. Generally speaking, with vignettes, minus 0.50 is what I would call the sweet spot. I will go less than that sometimes. Sometimes I'll go down to minus 0.35, and sometimes I'll go up as high as like 0.70, 0.75, minus 0.70, minus 0.75. Somewhere in that range is generally good, and I only go to the higher end if the picture warrants it. Sometimes maybe to create a little bit of a dramatic effect. This picture wouldn't be a bad one to go a little bit higher with, because of the fact that we already have like a darker background, that darker water. So we could do that if we wanted, but I'm going to stick with the minus 0.50. I think that creates a nice range there, right? We have some darker edges, but yet we still have those little highlights in the water that retain some of that detail going on there. So I really like the way this looks. That is all there is to using masks in Lightroom Classic. But what a difference this makes. We have really made our subjects pop off the background a little bit. The focus is all on them. And now when you look at the photo, all your eyes are doing is gravitating to that beautiful, beautiful bird that we have standing in front of us. Now, this is a little extra kind of pro tip, if you will. This is what I do, again, on 99.9% of my photos. But if you notice, sometimes we can use masking to create a little bit more dramatics in our photo. Let me show you what I mean here. If you look at the back of this bird, we have a little light source going on here, right? There's a little sunlight peeking through the trees and lighting up the back a little bit. How could we further enhance that? Well, we could add another mask right here by clicking the plus sign. And when I'm doing things like this, this is where I really like to use the radio mask again. Now, we just used it for our vignette, but now we're going to use it to kind of enhance the lighting that's occurring on the back of our bird. So I'm going to draw out a shape, right, by clicking and holding and dragging. That's somewhat similar to the back of the bird, right? And you can see that I can rotate it. I come over here, my cursor turns into a little double arrow. I can rotate this now and turn it a little bit so that I can match it up with kind of the angle of my bird's back. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and I'm going to add just a little exposure to the bird on the back. Okay, you can see very subtle. I'm going up to about 0.37, 0.40, that area. That looks pretty natural there. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here and I'm going to add a little yellow to it, right? Because I want to give it that effect of sunlight. Oh, see how that's warming up really beautifully, right? I'm going to go up to about 25 on that. And look at that now. Now it looks like we have some beautiful natural sunlight on the bird, which we did, but we're only enhancing it a little bit just to give it that little extra something. We didn't make it look unnatural. We didn't make it look ridiculous. We used a very subtle approach to giving it some warmth to create that beautiful warm sunlight that we often get in the early morning hours. That is really where I would end the masking part of my edits. Now, there are a few more things that we are going to do to this photo, but that will be in the next video. So let me know, guys, do you use masking in Lightroom Classic? Do you use it differently than what I just showed you? If you do, let me know in the comments below what you do, what you like to use, and what you think about masking. If this is something new to you, how do you feel about giving this a go? Can you really see how you can add some dramatics to your image, how you can add depth, texture, and dimension? Let me know in the comments below. Hey, I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. If you like this video, subscribe to it. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care.